myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good afternoon, welcome along to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith, Tuesday, and it is Ross Gregory. Good afternoon, Ross.
Afternoon, Steve. Afternoon, everyone.
Good to see you, and good to see John, just as Alan in the chat, still laid up in hospital. In the right place, John. Get well soon, mate. I hope everything is going to go according to plan today. But wow, what a weekend. Still on a high from that wonderful performance against Spurs. Ross, give us your take on that game first and foremost. I'm sure lots of people will have lots of questions, but give us your take on the game first.
I mean, what can be said that hasn't already been said about that game? It was an incredible, sensational, mind-blowing first 20 minutes. I don't think, I'll hold my hands up. I thought that Newcastle would win, and I said that I thought they would come out of the blocks really quickly and get off to a fast start. But I didn't expect that fast to start. I don't think anybody would have predicted that in a million years. So some of the forward players, some of the how clinical Newcastle were in that, and how ruthless they were in that final third was incredible to watch. You caveat it slightly, I suppose, with the fact that Spurs were god awful. But that shouldn't take away what Newcastle did in that first 20-25 minutes. It was a ruthless kind of juggernaut of a performance, just absolutely steamrolled all over Spurs, who weren't prepared, who weren't equipped to deal with the pace, the power, the movement, the strength, the intensity that Newcastle showed. And following on from, I suppose one of the most pleasing parts of it was following on from the Villa performance, which was really poor, probably the poorest performance Newcastle have put in this season. To bounce back with a performance which is arguably the best that they've put in this season, it shows the character of the team. It shows the resilience of that side. It shows the motivational powers of Eddie Howe as well, and it was just nigh on the perfect performance. The one that the only thing I've seen pretty much similar to that, Steve, is if you go back to 93 Leicester, 92, 93 Leicester, the last game of the season when Newcastle were 6-0 up at half time against Leicester City at St James's. That's the only thing I can kind of almost compare it to. And even that, you look at the caliber of opposition. All right, at the time Newcastle had won the Division 1 Championship and Leicester were going for the playoffs, I think, if I remember right. But so that there were no mugs. But in terms of levels, you come up against a Spurs team who've got a World Cup winners in their team. They've got England's record goal scorer. They're littered with experienced internationals, and just to blow them away with that performance was absolutely outstanding. And I don't think we will ever see a 20-minute spell at the start of a game quite like that. Certainly in my lifetime, I'd be very surprised if I saw something of that ilk. So absolutely fantastic. Just took your breath away. And I don't know what you were like, Steve, but I was very similar to Jacob Murphy after the third goal and Alexander Isak after the 5 goals. Just a little bit bemused by it all, just completely shocked and in awe and not quite comprehending what had gone on. I was in a cold, freezing cold athletics stand in Shildon, watching my daughter in her athletics competition on Sunday afternoon. There was 3 or 4 of us dads kind of huddled around an iPhone, watching it on a stream, jumping up and down in this cold concrete stand in the middle of Shildon, and it's certainly an experience that will live long in the memory.
Yeah, incredible. Doesn't matter where you were. Like I said, if you were watching it on the TV, if you listened on the radio, if you were there, an amazing performance. And what I said last night is I think Newcastle fans need to get used to it. Over the last few years, I've been watching Manchester City demolish teams at home, and rightly so, because of the quality of players that they've got. And it felt a bit like the Chelsea game last season. I said when I came back from Stamford Bridge last season, I felt Newcastle had arrived. It was a different atmosphere amongst the supporters at the away end. We lost the game 1-0. It was a tight, narrow game, but Newcastle really looked as if they'd turned a corner. And for me, fast forward to that performance at the weekend, that feels like another monumental moment in Newcastle United's new ownership. That was a big game, a crunch game. Newcastle United had to win. Many times I've seen them collapse, crumble, not turn up, whatever you want to call it, in those kind of games. Newcastle just did a job on not only Tottenham, but they did it on Manchester United a few weeks earlier. They did it at Chelsea. They did it at Arsenal, the back end of last season. And Newcastle have got a habit of now not just getting a result out of these games, but completely outplaying the opposition and winning these games. And for me personally, I genuinely feel that, this is the beginning of the next stage, and it's absolutely fantastic, mate. It really is. It's a great time to be a Newcastle United fan. And, we just got to sit back and enjoy it. And I think there'll be a few more games where Newcastle can knock up the goals. Although I have to agree with you, I think it'll be a while before we see 5 goals in 20 minutes. But that's what Manchester United specialise in at the Etihad. Quick goals, quick starts to games, finishing the opposition off. And many times you see Manchester City 2-0 up in 5 minutes at the Etihad and finishes the game, stops the game. There's no chance of the opposition making a comeback. So for me, I think it's something we'll have to get used to, seeing goals at Newcastle rather than goals to Newcastle. But, lots of questions coming in, as usual. Ian Toon Trader says, all right, Stephen Ross, where after Sunday do you think we'll finish in the league table? I think third is nailed on, as we've an extra hidden point with goal difference being so good. And Ian's cancelled a meeting, put a meeting back to listen to your dulcet tones, he says. So, I think third, Ross. I think third is where Newcastle want to finish. They can't finish top 2, but I think they've got their eyes on third. I don't think they're looking at fourth. I think they're certainly aiming the higher. The players certainly are anyway.
Yeah, I think it's the momentum's with Newcastle. If we can keep everybody fit and firing and in good form, then there's no reason at all why they can't finish third. You look at the running now between now and the end of the season, and it's not the worst running in the world. There's a couple of 3 tricky fixtures in there that you would look at. There's some that you would expect or hope for 3 points, certainly the way Newcastle are playing. I don't mind if it's third or fourth. I think it's just a case of nailing that top 4 spot. And I've looked at the table, I've looked at the fixtures, and I think another 4 wins out of the last 7 games will secure top 4. I think that'll give Newcastle 71 points. Adam maybe's a draw in there as well. So I think they can afford to lose a couple of games and still finish in the top 4 at this rate. I think 71, 72 points. There's only once in the last 10 years that a team finishing with 71 points hasn't finished in the top 4. So look, let's be confident and let's enjoy this. But not ultimately the top 4 is the only place that Newcastle need to finish. If they can sneak into third, and then great. It's a little bit extra money in the pockets, and the Champions League's obviously all secured. So it's going to be tight still between now and the end of the season. Man United are kind of the main challengers, but I can't see Newcastle now, and I hope I'm not going to put the kiss of death on them. I just can't see Newcastle now failing to qualify for the Champions League.
No, I don't think you're putting the kiss of death on them. I think most of us feel exactly the same now in that performance. You're rightly feeling that confidence that, we couldn't have had the week before because of that. 2 chalk and cheese performances. Unbelievable, really. Couldn't believe it was the same team, but certainly had a point to prove, I think. Dylan is saying that there's a lot of talk of McTominay is still replacing Longstaff. I'd love to see the 2 of them alongside. Bruno, what's your thoughts if we get him? McTominay is still, making headlines. Ross.
Yeah, and we've spoken about him on this show a few times, Steve. I'm not against Scott McTominay coming in. I know he's split a bit of opinion around the fan base. I think he's a good player. I think he's very similar to, in a lot of ways, to Sean Longstaff. I think he's got good energy. He can press. He's somebody who I think would add to Newcastle's squad. Look, whether he would come in and hugely improve the starting 11, I'm not sure about that. But I think what he would do is he would add depth to that midfield, and in the midfield certainly does need some extra depth. I think he's, from what I've seen in the Man United fans and season ticket holders and that I've spoken to, they say that McTominay he's better served further forward. He's better served in that, he's not someone whose best position is sitting in front of the back four and being that kind of defensive midfielder. He's better served higher up the pitch, and he's actually one of the better finishers in the Man United squad. Maybe he's outside of Rashford and maybe it's Bruno Fernandes. He's probably the best finisher that they've got. So I think he'd be a welcome addition to the squad, providing that it's that the money's decent enough. When Newcastle aren't shelling out silly money. I do get why people, maybe not for this one and think he's a Man United reject and whatever. I can see all the sides of the argument, but I think he'd be a good addition to the squad.
Yeah, I think Everton will be a harder game than most expect. We don't have a good record at Goodison Park. Plus, the way they play will make it a difficult game with a possible odd goal sealing the game. Alan, tongue-in-cheek, I'm sure. Ross, so disappointed it was only 6-1. The team looked laboured in the second half. I was looking for 10. I just hope they play better against Everton or we'll be in trouble for the top 4.
Do you know what it is, Steve, as well? And this is the Newcastle fan in you. This is the because you've been brought up on so many disappointing performances and results that even at 5-0 at half time, I wasn't 100% relaxed. You knew that Newcastle were going to go on and win, don't get me wrong, but you're still there's just always that little niggle in the back of your mind that you think, once Kane scores after 3 or 4 minutes, you start thinking, they need to get control of this game again, or it could go 5-2, 3, and all of a sudden there's always that negativity around you, or that pessimism, I think, as a Newcastle fan. Well, certainly there is with me. So
it's Stockholm syndrome, which is what Mitch has talked about on here many, many times, and that is because of the 14 years we had under Ashley, I think. No, absolutely, 100%. But it probably goes back further than that, Steve, as well. It goes back to the QPR game in the 80s where 4-0 up at half time and ended up drawing 5s each. I can still remember listening to that one in me grandma's sitting room, or grandma's spare room, on the radio, and thinking 4-0 up at half time, brilliant. And then it turns out to 5s each. So it's the life of a kind of if you follow Newcastle, I think you've always got to sometimes expect the worst, but hope for the best. Yeah, I think you're right, mate. It's going to take a little bit of getting used to, I think, this kind of atmosphere, this kind of feeling. But we'll enjoy the ride while we can. A lot of questions came in quite early. Just want to get to them now. John says, "Hello, everyone. The feel-good factor around the club in the mid-90s under Keegan was excellent. Do you think it's even better now?"
It's a difficult question. I don't think you'll ever have that sense of absolute fun and enjoyment and freedom and I don't know, that whole spark around the Keegan era when that took off. That was something I'd never experienced before. Following Newcastle, and I don't think this one is quite there. It's very different. It's great as well, but that early 90s when Keegan came in, it had a slightly different feel to it. It was just so free and fun. And I'm not saying that this time isn't as well, but it's a different world, I think, with Premier League as well. There's a lot more focus and money and attention and everything else like that goes with it. The profile's completely different. All maybe a bit more naive back then, and it was an exceptional time to be following Newcastle back then. But this is rivaling it and running a very, very close second for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting there slowly but surely. There's no doubt about that. John also says it's pretty startling. It would now be a big disappointment if we didn't finish in the top 4. This is the first full season of our revolution, or is it evolution? So yeah, it would be disappointing if we didn't finish in there. But I think as the games decrease, which is a point Eddie Howe keeps making in the press conferences, then Newcastle do look as if they're heading towards that elusive Champions League spot.
Yeah, and it's getting closer. It's getting closer, and if you'd said Newcastle would be in this position with 7 games to go at the start of the season, you'd have bitten the hands off. You would have maybe been sectioned as well. You would have had the doctors calling around. I think if people had said Newcastle are 3rd in the table with 7 games to go, having just demolished the 5th best team or in the league 6-1 at home. So it's a remarkable turnaround. It's a remarkable transformation. I still do think it's more evolution rather than revolution. You look at a lot of the players that were involved on Sunday still were players who were at the club prior to the takeover, or certainly prior to Eddie Howe coming in. You still had your Callum Wilsons, your Miggy Almirons, your Sean Longstaffs, your Javier Manquillo coming on, Fabian Schär, that you could go on and on, Joe Willock, Joe Linton. There was so many players that were involved either in the starting 11 or off the bench that it shows how far that the club has come over such a short period of time. But it's fantastic to see, and all testament to Eddie Howe and the coaching staff and the way that they've not only integrated the new players in the recruitment's been exceptional, but the way that they've improved the players who were already at the club.
Yeah, Graham Townsley on LinkedIn says, brilliant Sunday. Really need to secure 3rd place. I know the summer will be full of JWP, Madison Barnes, etc. I just don't see how they walk into the team with Willock, Longstaff and Murphy. Even thought, Ross, what's your thoughts on that? Yeah, there's going to be some major ins and outs, I think, in this summer transfer window, especially with Champions League.
Yeah, look, if Newcastle get the Champions League, regardless, I suppose, whether they're getting the Champions League, but they need to improve the squad. They need to improve that squad depth. We've seen that Newcastle have performed exceptionally well when they've been at full tilt every game. If you add Europe into the mix, you are adding an extra dozen games potentially into it. Or certainly 8 to 10. You're adding all the extra travel that's involved and the extra scrutiny. It's your preparation as well for games. So you've got midweek games. Even if you're at home and you're not doing the travel, your focus, your prep for half of that week is on the midweek game, and then you can only start prepping for the weekend game, the Premier League game, on the Thursday or the Friday. It's a very, very quick turnaround. So it will bring extra challenges and extra things for Eddie Howe and his team to kind of overcome. And I do think one of those will have to be an increase in the depth of the squad in terms of the quality. Then players that were mentioned there, your Willocks and your Longstaff, both been absolutely fantastic this season. Jacob Murphy is kind of renaissance is a real positive story and something that I think everybody's delighted by. But it's the old adage, isn't it? I think if you stand still in football, you actually go backwards. Newcastle need to keep progressing. They need to keep looking at how to improve that squad. And there will be some difficult decisions taken along the way, and some players who have been fantastic servants to the club who might see either reduced game time or they'll be moved out elsewhere. That's the nature of football. You've got to keep moving on. You've got to keep progressing. You look at the top teams. You look at what Pep does at Barcelona, at Man City. Sorry, with shipping out people like Cancelo and Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus and players like that who've won him titles just because he wants to keep improving, always looking at getting that extra 1 or 2 or 3% out. So that would be no different for Newcastle next season. They'll bring in half a dozen players, I think, over the summer. They will have a challenge on their hands because your Willocks and your Longstaffs and your Murphys and various others, Fabian Schär are the players in possession of those shirts, and they'll have to be exceptional players with an exceptional attitude to get in ahead of those. But that's what you want to see. You want to see competition for places, and Newcastle continually striving to be the best that they can possibly be.
Yeah, John's last question in his first batch was: with 3 or 4 quality additions in the summer, we could challenge for the Premier League next season. Do you agree?
I don't. No, I don't think Newcastle would challenge for the Premier League next season, even with 3 or 4, even with 5 or 6. I think the gap is still there's still a little bit of a gap. And I understand. Look, you can look and say, well, look, Arsenal finished 5th last season, and all of a sudden they're out in front, and you can point to what Leicester did and all that sort of thing as well. I don't think Newcastle are in a position, or will be in a position in the next 12 months to challenge for the title. But I think it's got to be a gradual improvement. I've mentioned the playing in Europe next season will take an extra toll that players and managers and the club as a whole isn't used to. It's not built around that. It will take a little bit of getting used to. So I'd be more than happy with another season like Newcastle have had this season, with a couple of additions, because everybody else is going to strengthen as well. You're going to look at Liverpool and Chelsea. Then they're not going to have this poorer season as what they've had this season. Man United will continue to strengthen. City and Arsenal will all strengthen. So it'll be a tough. I think it'll be tough enough just to get into the top 4 again next season. Never mind challenging for the title. But that's just me. That's maybe my slightly negative outlook at it, I suppose. But I've been realistic. I think a top 4 finish next season would be more than good enough.
Okay. David says, I see the national press are focusing on our players playing for a massive Saudi bonus if we qualify for the Champions League. They just can't resist, can they? Yeah, that seems to have come up in the press. But yeah, sometimes their incentives are attached to people's contracts and stuff like that. Is this got legs, this story, Ross? Is this just somebody with a bit of guesswork or a bit of mischief or a bit of both?
I'll be honest, I've not read that particular story. I've seen the headline. I think I'd have to read it and understand it a bit more. But every club that you go to, there's every club will have incentives built into their playing structure. If you finish in the Champions League, there will be some sort of bonuses. If you win the cups, you get some sort of bonuses. There's that's nothing new. Whether it's just been, like I say, I haven't read the story, so it's difficult to comment too much on the details. But I would expect most clubs in the Premier League to have them bonuses attached to them.
Yeah, Alan agrees. He says, spot on, Ross. We need to improve the squad dramatically. Don't be fooled. We've had a tremendous season, but we need quality additions next year, and our aim must be to stay in the top 4 next year. Paul disagrees with you. He says, I'm afraid I've got to disagree with Ross. Bring 5 quality players in and we will challenge, but we may not win it. So a couple of variant opinions there. Steve Mowat says he's going back to the game at the weekend. He says, afternoon, Stephen Ross. Question, which through ball was better, Willock or Terry Hibbert in the semi-final, of course, the Supermac?
I'd say it's a good question. I've seen the comparison. I'll have to go Joe Willock. I just thought it was absolutely sensational. Outside of the foot, bent around the defender. Albeit, the defence was as you could have driven a bus through that Spurs defence at that point. But I thought it was a fantastic one look, one touch ball, absolutely brilliant. Terry Hibbert is obviously an iconic pass for Supermac's goal in the semi-final. But I'll go on the side of Joe Willock on this one. Andrew
says, change all those draws into wins and we'll be top. We're capable of winning the title soon. Treble next year, lads. That's optimistic, Andrew, but nothing wrong with that, mate. John Askew's asked then, is anyone surprised at how quickly Isak has adapted to the Premier League? I honestly thought he might struggle. I'm now thinking he'd become a toon great. Go on, son. Yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing start to his career. He jeopardy with a bit of injury at the start, but ultimately, 15 games, 10 goals, and he's one of those strikers. I think we covered it on the fans forum last night, that when he gets into a position, you just don't think he's going to miss. You've got confidence in him putting it in the back of the net, which is something we haven't had for a long time.
Yeah, he's in a real kind of rich vein of form. His confidence is clearly high. I think he's a confident character. Anyhow, he's somebody who's got a lot of self-belief and self-confidence, which is what you need. What he's married that kind of ability with is the graft, is the attitude, is the determination, is the hard work, that's the pressing that Eddie Howe demands from his forward players. And you look at, you could highlight a number of clips on Sunday, certainly in that first half, where his pressing and his energy and his defending from the front actually played a major part in that first 20 minutes success. So yeah, he's banging form. He's absolutely, he looks a real talent, a real handful. He's got ability in the air. He's pacey. He's got a kind of ice cool ability in front of goal. Let's just not pile the pressure on him too much at this point and overhype him. He's a fantastic player, and I think he will go on to be a really top quality striker for Newcastle. But he's still young, and he's still new to the Premier League, and you never know. Once he's going to have to adapt at some point when teams look to set up differently against Newcastle and look to set up differently against him. So there will be some challenges further down the line from him, I'm sure. But I think he's certainly got the talent and the self-confidence to overcome any obstacles that are put in front of his way. Yeah.
Who do you think should win Premier League Manager of the Season? Says Tom. And I think somebody else had asked about that. Geordie Toon for Life had said, if Arsenal don't win the league and we finish in the top four, is Eddie Howe Manager of the Year? It's 100% yes from me. How can it not be, considering where we were before Eddie and his staff arrived? Thoughts on that one, mate?
I think he's absolutely right. I think if Arsenal win the league from the position they were in fifth last season and the issues that they had, in terms of the young squad who lacked the mentality and everything else like that, I think Mikel Arteta would be a deserved winner of Manager of the Year, Manager of the Season. But Eddie Howe is running him very, very close. What he's done with Newcastle, getting them to a cup final, get them into that top four, revitalising the team, the everything around Eddie Howe's job. You couldn't argue against. If Eddie Howe wins it, I don't think there'd be many people arguing that it was the wrong choice. For me, it's between those two. Pep Guardiola's had a he's just a phenomenal manager though, and I suppose the other side of it is, if Man City win the treble this season, if Man City win the Premier League, the Champions League, and the FA Cup, and you don't give him Manager of the Season, there'll be a few questions asked.
Yeah, I just think he's done so much in a short space of time. He's got to be up there. But it'll be interesting to see, how the season pans out. I think he's got a good chance. He's in with a shout, that's for certain. Tom Dixon says, according to Keith Downey, he says we need to sign at least 7 players in the transfer window. What's your thoughts on that? 7 players? I'm not sure where they would all fit in, but I guess it depends on how many go out for me, as to how many come in. But what's your thoughts on numbers of incomings?
I think it'll be around the half dozen number. I think 5, 6 maybe 7 with a couple of young'uns maybe brought in as well, just as kind of backup. But I do think there's some key areas. What Newcastle really want to do is go elite and go quality versus quantity, and that will obviously have an impact on the budget as well. If you want to bring in 5 absolutely top quality world-class players, then you could be looking at the thick end of 250 million, unless they're using some of the contacts and the bargains and looking around some of the teams that are struggling, or players who are out of contract or only have 12 months left on the contract. But I think 5 or 6. I think they need another centre half. Fabian Schär's been fantastic this season, but again, I go back to what we were saying earlier. Them 1 or 2%. If you can move them 1 or 2%, can you get somebody in who's a younger, fresher, quicker model of Fabian Schär potentially in that right centre back role? I think we'll probably look at a left back, a centre midfielder, and maybe another forward or 2. So I think 5, possibly 6. players coming in this summer. But you're right, Steve. It will depend. They will need to move some players on. They will need to move some of the fringe players on. They may even need to sell somebody who can bring in a fair chunk of money as well, just to balance the books slightly. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a relatively high profile, big name departure as well. But yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting summer, that's for certain.
Definitely is. Okay, halfway through the show, time for the ads.
A big thanks to all our sponsors: Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay as you go waste collection. Thanks also to Mr. Vicky's, handmade in Cumbria. These sauces are really hot stuff. You can order them by emailing info@mrvickys.co.uk or by telephoning 01768 210 102. Thanks to Neil and the guys at Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. If you want to subscribe to the show, hit the subscribe button tonight. It is free. Hit the thumb up under the video to like the video and click share to share to your other social media. If you want to join the channel, hit join. There's 3 different tiers. Pick the one that suits you and help support the channel financially. If you want to pay a one-off membership fee of £25 and get these goodies, a scarf, a pen, a cup, and entry into the monthly draw, then go to NUFC Matters and look for membership pack. Failing that, get your smartphone and put it over the QR code and it will take you straight there. We're also a podcast and you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean and other podcast providers. Usually goes up 24 hours after the show has finished. We also support the food bank on this channel. If you want to make a virtual donation today at the Matchday Bucket, go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk and you can make a deposit today. Don't forget to enter the Shearer raffle. There's 150 tickets, £1 per ticket, and you can win a limited edition signed Alan Shearer ball. Enter now at nufcmatters.com. If you have a look on our website, we've also got a vast range of mugs, t-shirts, cups, and whatever else takes your fancy. The Isaac t-shirt is proven popular this month, $16.99 plus delivery from nufcmatters.com. Don't forget as well, we do a range of events over the course of the year. We have Peter Beardsley, an up-close and personal evening at the Tynemouth Surf Cafe. Limited tickets remain, 25th of April. Get them now from Surf Cafe, tynemouth.co.uk or from ticketweb.uk. There's also an evening with Peter Beardsley on May the 19th at the Tyneside Irish Centre, and you can get tickets from newcastlelegends.com, and tickets are £50. Don't forget our end of season do takes place 27th of May, 7 o'clock at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets for that one are a tenner. NUFCmatters.com is where you can get your tickets for that. In June, Thursday the 1st of June to be precise, Rob Lee will be at Louis Liquor Store in the Big Market in Newcastle, and tickets for that are available direct from the venue. And an evening with Rob Lee, Lee Clark and John Beresford takes place the next evening on Friday the 2nd of June at the Grand Hotel in Gosforth. This is a charity event and tables are of £10, £700, and you can book them by contacting Natalie at heelandtour.org.uk or visiting their website. In July, Gavin Peacock is in Newcastle on July the 10th at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets for that are available from nufcmatters.com. And he also takes an evening with at the Surf Cafe in Tynemouth on the 11th of July. So get your tickets direct from the venue for that one as well. And if you're a boxing fan, the Night of Champions, Ricky Hatton, Frank Bruno, Nigel Benn and Joe Calzaghe takes place at the Fed. And that will be taking place on the 16th of June. More dates to be added. Tickets from all those events, www.goldstarpromotions.co.uk.
Mike Stewart says, will Eddie change the style of play as we buy more premium quality players, or is what we see now how we will continue to play Ross?
Yeah, that's another really good question, that one. I think at the minute in time, I'd be surprised if there's a change in style, certainly over the next year or two. But Newcastle are going to have to adapt because other teams will look at how Newcastle are playing and try to combat that. And so you do need a kind of a plan B at the minute. Newcastle's style is very much kind of front foot, high energy, high press. Winning that ball back in the final third of the opposition. I think I looked at some numbers, some stats over the weekend, and I think only Arsenal have won the ball more times in the final third than what Newcastle have this season. So it's a really effective way of playing, and at times it means it's similar to an extent in how Liverpool set up in the early days under Jurgen Klopp. There was that high press from the front. They had Mane and Salah and Firmino who would press from the front, and then the midfield three, and it meant that they didn't really need somebody who was as creative, who could spot a pass, who could unlock defenses in that way, because they were winning the ball so high up the pitch that was almost their playmaker, if you like. But teams will adapt, and if teams start playing in a different way with a lower block, Newcastle are going to have to, maybe some games adapt to becoming a bit more possession based and a bit more patient with their play and having to move the ball around a little bit, and maybe have that kind of number 10 who can unlock a pass or find a different way of breaking teams down. But I think certainly for the next season or two, I'd be very surprised if Newcastle deviate from the style of play that they've been shown.
David John Cook says, does Ross think we may keep Gillespie and Dummett on to fulfill our locally trained quota for the Champions League squad? Some speak of signing Tony as he would qualify, but I'm not sure about that.
I'd be surprised if Gillespie and Dummett were still at the club next season. I would be surprised. I just don't. They're certainly nowhere near the starting 11, and they're not even really near the 18, 19 neither. So in terms of game time and contribution on the pitch on a match day, then they're not even in the pecking order really at the minute. But what you've got to understand as well is, and I've spoken about this before, is a squad's makeup isn't just determined by the players that are on the pitch, and some players contribute in different ways behind the scenes, and with younger players, working with the 23s, or just the camaraderie around the changing room, and that's really important as well. So I think Eddie Howe will base his decisions around these players on purely kind of footballing reasons and what they bring to the squad as a whole. I think there'll be enough quota of players to hit Champions League requirements, regardless of whether Gillespie and Dummett stay though.
Yeah, I can't see either of those two staying. I've got to be perfectly honest. It's Dummett's been a good servant to the club, but no room for sentiment, I think, is what was said on here before. Les says, in terms of Champions League and homegrown quota, rather than making unnecessary additions to the squad, would it not be better to stick with Sean Longstaff and Elliot Anderson and submit a squad of 23 for the campaign?
Well, Newcastle will be sticking with Longstaff and Elliot Anderson next season. That they will be in the squad. There's no doubt at all about that. But Newcastle will have to. These are some of the challenges that Newcastle will have to look at. They'll have to look at how they can improve their squad, how they can improve the starting 11, but the additions in with signings, bringing in players who fit the criteria that's needed for various different reasons. But ultimately, it's about getting the best squad on the pitch. And you're right, there's no room for sentiment, but certainly, there won't be jettisoning Sean Longstaff or Elliot Anderson anytime soon. Two really good homegrown players who've come through, who've got a big future to play at Newcastle.
Yeah, got a huge future at Newcastle, both of those lads. And I've got to agree with you on that one as well, Ross. Benny says Gvardiol or Alphonso Davies for left back.
I've not been made aware that either of them are on the radar for Newcastle. Two good players, obviously, but I do think they'll go for a left back in the summer, which will probably signal the end of end of the line for certainly for Jamal Lewis and Paul Dummett, who are like I said, down the pecking order. What it means for Matt Targett is another question, I suppose, as well. But yeah, two good players there that Benny's mentioned.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, that's a good shout. I'd like to think that we end up with players of that caliber, especially going into the Champions League. It's going to alter the dimensions a little bit anyway. Do you think we've got a big advantage to other clubs due to geography? Says John. The other powerhouses of major clubs in their area, London and the Northwest, intensifying competition in games. The Northeast has one big boy. We've often heard that it's a disadvantage being up north because it's too cold, etc., and there's not the same array of shops and nightlife, maybe. But we know that's just all rubbish. Kevin Keegan even had to lie to Rob Lee to persuade him to come here. What's your thoughts on the geographical situation?
Look, I'll be honest. I think there will be an element of some players, certainly foreign players, who would who would be more attracted by the bright lights of London. That London's the big city, the transport links and everything else out of it. It certainly would be an attraction for some foreign players, but ultimately they wouldn't be the right players for Newcastle. You want players who want to come to be part of the project, who want to buy into the area, who want to be part of something that Newcastle are growing, not just here because of whatever nightlife or whatever bars or restaurants or whatever money that they're being paid as well. It's got to be for the right reasons that they come into the club. So I don't think geography would pay too much of an issue there. I think if you're going for the right types of players, they'll come to your club regardless of whereabouts you're situated.
Yeah, I agree as well on that. Do you think we are due to give another team a heavy defeat like we did to Spurs, says Tom? We've scored some goals, I remember a while back we were sitting on this platform going, wow, we just need to add goals to our game. But I mean, we've handed out some hidings to West Ham, Brentford and Spurs.
Yeah, it's been, the performances in front of goal have been a lot more clinical and ruthless than that spell that kind of went through in probably maybe February and the start of March, where goals were a little bit harder to come by. I think obviously Alexander Isak's return to the starting lineup in fitness has been played a massive part of that. But everybody looks fresh. You wouldn't have put much money on Jacob Murphy having 2 goals after 9 minutes against Spurs. He's starting to weigh in. Miguel Almiron getting back fit. Callum Wilson, whether he starts or comes off the bench again, he looks hungry and he looks back to fitness. He's another goal threat. Joe Linton weighing in with goals from midfield. Joe Willock always starting to look a goal threat. Should have scored on Sunday. So all of a sudden it looks a lot more positive going forward, whereas previously there was that spell where the creativity wasn't quite there, and the intensity in the press and everything else just wasn't functioning as a whole. But when it clicks like it did on Sunday, then you get that ruthlessness, that clinical nature in front of goal. I think the first 5 goals, I think there was only probably five or six shots. If you take Joe Linton's shot that was saved for the first one, there was probably only six shots in the first 20 minutes, and Newcastle scored with 5 of them. So it was a ruthless clinical performance. You're not going to get that every game where you're going to score pretty much every shot that you take, but it's great to see Newcastle a real attacking threat and with so many goal scoring options around the team with players banging form at the minute.
John asks, who is our main threat to a top 4 finish?
That's a good one. I think for me, you look at the teams that are chasing, and Spurs. It'll be really interesting to see how Spurs rebound from Sunday, and obviously they've sacked Christian Stellini since that game, and given the role to the job to Ryan Mason, who knows the club. He's young. He's relatively inexperienced. It'll be interesting to see whether he can get more of a tune out of them. But to be honest, they looked shot on Sunday. They looked absolutely shot. And you wouldn't be putting much money on them chasing Newcastle down. Liverpool, you wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool went on a run and won every game between now and the end of the season, because they've got that type of ability in their locker. So I still think Liverpool will have a say in that top 4, top 5 run. Villa, it kind of got themselves right into contention, then had a little blip on Saturday with a 1-1 each draw, but I don't see them challenging for the top 4. I think that run's come a little bit too late, and they've left themselves a bit too much to do. The other one, I suppose, is Brighton, who've got a lot of games in hand, but you'd rather have points on the board than games in hand, and they're going to have to play a bit of catch up between now and the end of the season with games. So that's why I'm relatively confident now that Newcastle will finish in the top 4, because I think the main rivals have either got too much to do, or the in Spurs' case they've fallen away. So I don't know. Liverpool might. If I was picking a top 4, a top 5, I would have Liverpool as probably finishing 5th. If that answers the question.
Liverpool are level on games in Newcastle, but they're 9 points behind. Newcastle really have to go on an abysmal run for they need a monumental collapse, which they haven't had all season. For Liverpool to overtake them, and Liverpool need to win those games. Brighton, as you say, 2 games in hand on Newcastle, currently on 49 points, 10 points behind Newcastle. And Spurs, Newcastle got a game in hand on them, 6 points ahead of Spurs. You'd say Spurs are still a threat if they can get a run together, and Newcastle again have to go on a bit of a dismal run. And I think you're right with Villa. Newcastle, a game in hand on Villa. And after that draw at the weekend, 8 points ahead of them. It's in Newcastle's hands, and that's it. Yeah,
absolutely. If Newcastle win 4, if Newcastle win 4, that's 7. That's an extra 12 points. That puts them on 71 points. Liverpool need to win every game. Brighton pretty much need to win every game. Villa need to win every game. Spurs need to win pretty much most of their games as well. So 4 wins out of 7, and I think that's more than achievable. And then everybody else has got to be kind of nigh on perfect between now and the end of the season, which 1 or 2 teams might be. Like I say, I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool pretty much won every game between now and the end of the season, because they've got that capacity to do that. But I think certainly 13 points, 12, 13 points out of the rest of the run-in will see Newcastle in that top 4.
Yeah, I agree. And Alan says Brighton still, Man City and Arsenal to play. Liverpool have a very favourable fixture list. It's exciting times and exciting running. John says, will Everton be trickier than some mags might be expecting? And Andy, talking about the Everton game, says, think we will see the long ball over the top from Everton on Thursday. Stephen Ross, how do you think Eddie will counteract this, and what changes, if any? And the last question on the Everton game from PDK says, should Gordon play against Everton? It's a no from me.
It's a no from me as well. I don't think it's the right game for Anthony Gordon. I wouldn't necessarily make too many changes for me on Thursday, and I don't think Eddie Howe will either. The only issue that we always think about with Newcastle is that intensity, and maybe sometimes freshening it up because they do put a heck of a lot into games. But I think probably the second half against Spurs, Newcastle were able just to save their legs a little bit, and I don't expect to be any changes at all on Thursday, other than perhaps if Fabian Schär is struggling with a hamstring injury, you might see Jamal Lascelles brought in. But other than that, I think it'll probably be the same starting 11. And you wouldn't want to make changes. Gordon going back to Goodison Park is obviously a big story. He's going to get a heck of a lot of stick, because of the nature of his departure and some of the stuff that's been said, and him being a kind of a local lad who they pinned a lot of their hopes on. It's there's going to be he's going to get a bit of stick, and he'll not expect any different. But I think he'll be on the bench, and he'll potentially come off in the second half and get a little bit of grief as he warms up and then makes his entrance into the fray. I do think this is a not necessarily banana skin, but it's a real tough game for Newcastle. Everton, the performances and results down at Goodison Park in previous years and seasons haven't always been the best, haven't always been the most consistent. I think I was stood next to you, Steve, wasn't I, last season down at?
You were, yeah.
And that was it was a funny game because Newcastle were right in it, but never really created too much. And then obviously Everton got a man sent off with 20 minutes to go or something like that, and you expected Newcastle to kick on, but they just looked a bit tired and weary, and Everton ended up pinching it at the end, and it was a huge winning result for them. That played, went a long way to keeping them in the Premier League. So Newcastle owe them a result. I think it will be a tough game. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is back for Everton, who's they've always missed a focal point up front, and he's a big threat up there. I know again he's somebody who maybe splits opinion a little bit, but I really like him when he's fit and firing. I think he's an excellent player when he's 100% fit and able to cause the problems to defenses that he can. So I think it's set up to be a really tight game and a really difficult game. I think there'll be one goal in it, and Newcastle will have to adapt their style a little bit, and maybe the style that Everton will play under Sean Dyche, it might be a little bit more direct, especially with Calvert-Lewin up there, and they'll have to be able to combat that. Maybe it's Jamal Lascelles coming in with his extra height and extra physical presence to what Fabian Schär has. It might not actually be the worst thing in the world, but we'll see when the team sheets drop on Thursday.
Yeah, interesting to see how Fabian Schär is. He looked okay on the sidelines, but maybe he was just taken off as a precaution. We'll find out a little bit more, I'm sure, from Eddie Howe's press conference. Gordon would be like Pickford. We shouldn't wind up the Everton crowd. Can't see him starting. If Schär's out, how about Big Dan inside and target left back? Not sure he'll play two left footers in the centre. Unfortunately, Derek, I think Eddie Howe sees him as a left back, and that's that. Alan Thompson says Everton will be a very hard game. I think they'll try and kick us off the pitch and the crowd will be up for it. We must score first. If we do, I think we win. Here's hoping. And Dan says, when we beat Everton, it's over. That is the biggest test mentally for the squad. And Troll says the Muppet that tied himself to the post destroyed our momentum, in my opinion. I would agree. Yeah, the stop oil protester who invaded the pitch last season has a lot to answer for. Alan says, I still think we need two strikers, Ross, next year. One proven and a younger striker, so we have 4 strikers for next year. Do you agree?
I think probably. I think we need another one who can play centrally. I suppose if you look at the system, it depends on what Eddie Howe's wanting to do, and playing the kind of the 4-3-3 that he does. 4 strikers for one position. That central position might be a little bit too much if he's planning on keeping Callum Wilson, which I assume he is. Isak, Callum Wilson, and one other, I think would be enough for me, providing that you bring in probably another wide player who can weigh in and chip in with goals, and somebody who's flexible. I think Newcastle have got a lot of options up front. Apart from Isak and Wilson, you've got Joe Linton who can play as a wide forward. Could arguably still do a job through the middle with his increased confidence these days, but you wouldn't want to really put him there. ASM, Jacob Murphy, Miguel Almiron, Anthony Gordon. There's a lot of options Newcastle have got in those forward positions now. That's before you even talk about Elliot Anderson or even potentially Joe Willock. So I think one through the middle, one sort of central striker would be good, whether that's somebody a bit younger who can act as a backup to Isak and Wilson, and then another wide player. I think would be ideal in my opinion. But maybe Eddie Howe's got a different thought process than me.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. I do agree it's a huge game. John reckons we'll win 3-0, and then the guy who tied himself to jail says, Dan, he's in jail. it's his pals we need to be aware of now. Les says, with Lascelles, despite long time out, he looked match fit versus City. And I think Eddie Howe's paid tribute to Lascelles a couple of times this season. His attitude's been right. He's put in the effort in training and he's ready to go if needed.
Yeah, I think everybody was a little bit nervous when they saw Lascelles in the starting lineup against City for a couple of reasons. Obviously, City the best team in the country, and Lascelles having not had much game time, not had much seen much action over the previous months. But he was very, very good. He didn't let anybody down. He was arguably one of Newcastle's best performers. So he's been a fantastic servant. He's been a fantastic professional, club captain, and a key part of the squad, regardless of what people think about him on the pitch. He's a real key part of that changing room dynamic. And Eddie Howe will have no qualms at all about putting him in against Everton on Thursday if Fabian Schär's not quite right. And fingers crossed, if he does play, that he puts in another really good, accomplished performance like he did at the Etihad.
Yeah, let's hope so. We will see Newcastle, of course, taking on Everton this Thursday, and then we play Southampton before Ross and I get together again next Tuesday. So Southampton, it's another team being threatened by relegation. Two big games coming up. Ross, how do you see? Let's go Thursday night first. How do you see that game against Everton going?
I say being tight, really, really tight. Maybe it's the odd goal in it. I don't think there'd be many goals. I know Newcastle just blitzed Spurs 5-1, and Everton are struggling down the bottom. But I think it'll be a completely different game, a real kind of high stakes, fervent atmosphere. I think when Goodison Park gets going and gets the fans get right behind Everton, it's a really good ground for kind of home atmosphere. I think it's one that if you give them a sniff and they get that passion and get going, then it could be a difficult evening. Equally, it's one of those stadiums as well, though, when fans do turn against the team, that it can be a difficult place for the home team to play. So I do think it'll be tight. I'll maybe score with a 1-0 Newcastle or a 2-1, something like that. And then moving into the Southampton game, that should be full of confidence. If Newcastle can get 6 points out of these two games, then almost there, really, almost there. Southampton at home is a game that on paper you would say it's a comfortable Newcastle win, and I do think it will be a comfortable win. But you just got to bear in mind that Southampton are fighting for their lives, absolutely scrapping for their Premier League future. They got a 3-3 draw against Spurs. They got a 3-3 draw against Arsenal and should have won that game. So they're no mugs. They're scrapping for their lives, and it will be another difficult game. But let's be ultra positive and go 6 points from the next two games. A tight win against Everton, and then something a little more comfortable against Southampton at St James's on Sunday.
Great stuff, as always, mate. Good to spend that bit of time with you. See you next Tuesday. Take care, mate.
Cheers, Steve. Thanks, everyone.